Hello and welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I'm Catherine Camp, your hostess for the show. And this is where we dig into difficult topics, the difficult topics of our day, in order to educate ourselves so that we can have conversations that count, conversations with an eternal perspective. And today we'll be talking again to a guest who's really kind to keep coming back and explaining things to us about the Constitution, about our country, about our founding documents, about what we stand for. And he is incredibly intelligent in this area. He was a Marine, a United States Marine, and so he really takes this seriously. He has a radio program, which I hope you all will go visit or have if you haven't already. But today we're going to get into a topic about Thanksgiving and maybe even some other external things in this area. So let me bring him back on. We're talking to G.R. Mobley today. There you are.
How we doing?
Thank you for coming back.
No problem at all. So we've kind of covered the the first Thanksgiving in America, and the intent is to try to resolve, I think, a paradox that I think we create as Christians. I don't know many Christians that don't want to see a changing of America back towards our Savior and focused on our Creator. And so we have the opportunity to do that. And actually, there's one event annually that as a nation we do that was the cast was died back in 1789 in our very first session of Congress, first session of the federal government existing, where they created a Thanksgiving, a national recognition of the people to recognize and give thanks. So let me ask, because I don't want to cloud doctrine. When we're blessed with something, what do? We give thanks usually, right? But actually, when we're blessed, when our Savior or when our Creator has blessed us, I should say, with something that's very significant, don't we and shouldn't we sanctify that? Like the scriptures, don't we sanctify? He blesses us with His word.
Yeah.
Don't we sanctify the scriptures? And so, how does a person sanctify something that we've been blessed with by Him?
Well, we give thanks.
Let's think about that.
Yeah.
So there are processes, right? And so I believe that those processes are very specific to either sacrifice and bearing thanks. And sacrifice has been actually one of the ways that we were commanded in the very beginning to give, to sanctify Him by actually having a sacrificial lamb, and that was actually replaced with Christ under the New Testament, correct? So there was a process that we actually sanctified what we did for our, to try to cleanse ourselves of our sins, and then Christ became that ultimate sacrifice. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't sanctify things in our lives. And actually, when we look at what the framers received, or what this nation received by the divine hand of providence, this Constitution specifically, they actually felt it was necessary to sanctify it. So one of those ways of sacrifice is to put a lamb on a rock, right? Or to give money, or to make a sacrifice of that, financial type, or even better, a sacrifice of our time and efforts. In other words, giving service. So many times when we receive a blessing, we can actually sanctify that blessing. And actually, I believe it creates this reciprocation with our Creator, that when we actually show how thankful we really are for something, He opens up the heavens a little bit more and blesses us. And actually, we create this, I'll just call it this really great whirlwind of blessings that we actually start obtaining. And I believe that as a nation, we have been failing. And if you want to see this nation take a turn, then put your money where your mouth is if you're really a Christian, and sanctify the Constitution. And the way they did it was on Thanksgiving, the third or fourth. Well, it's in here. I do assign Thursday, the 27th or 26th day of November, to be devoted by the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being. That's the language. And I want to actually go through this, because as I read this, it is clear that this nation sanctified the Constitution, and they were blessed for doing that.
Yeah.
They were not only just blessed in attaining the Constitution, this nation was blessed moving further forward with the Bill of Rights and other things that were to come.
Do you want me to pull up the letter?
Yes, yeah, go ahead. Let's do that. Okay. And
Now,
while you're doing that, let me go ahead and set the stage.
Okay.
So when this nation started, it all started from the tyranny of the king, right? I mean, we were all subjects, and the colonies were subjects to the king. The king had full control over the colonies, and so doing, he really came in and dismantled our government, and he inserted his own government. And that happened in like 1673. It wasn't all one big thing, but it all started in 1763. And not 1673, 1763. And so in 1763, the king started really basically clamping down on the colonies. And in so doing, the colonies started responding, and they used their rights as Englishmen to create these committees, count these assemblies, what have you, under the rights of Englishmen. Now, we have these same rights under the Constitution. It's called the right of assembly and petitioning. So we don't have to create a representative body like they did. But to be very specific, they stood up and they started petitioning the king. And the king just wasn't responding. And after a short period of time, when I say a short period of time, 13 years, they ended up declaring independence. And so they declared independence, and we kind of know the history, but it was an evolutionary process. Now, when Continental Congress declared independence, I wouldn't say that that was a time of tranquility, because the British Redcoats were already marching and basically waging war up in the New England states and so forth. I mean, they were being very vicious, coming after this resistance. And so this final act of, okay, that we're done, we're revolting and we're leaving, we're declaring our own independence, a huge act of treason. And so we ended up fighting a revolution, and we ended up winning a few years later, 1783. But at that point in time, we went from an Articles of Association of a governing document from 1774 into the Articles of Confederation that wasn't ratified. Actually, they started the Articles of Confederation, I think, in 1777, and they weren't ratified until 1783. And the Articles of Confederation was done in haste. It wasn't done with tranquility. It's not like they had a real opportunity to, sit at a table and ponder, the things that the Lord may want us to do. What ended up happening was the Articles of Confederation became problematic because they couldn't amend them. There was no way to actually get the money they needed to do administrative stuff. I mean, the Articles of Confederation were basically impotent and incapable of governing. So they basically said, we've got to have a convention to fix this problem. And the ultimate fix was this new government. And this new government came because at this point in time, these men finally had tranquility. And everybody knows Benjamin Franklin provided to the convention. He says, if our creator can, and I'm paraphrasing, if our creator notices a sparrow fall from the sky, how do we think we can erect a government without his assistance and blessing? So he basically challenged everybody. This is Benjamin Franklin. Everybody says, this non-Christian person says, well, let's go to our creator and ask for his assistance in erecting this nation. And so they went down to the closest church every morning and they prayed before their sessions. And so as they did that, under tranquility, they finally received his guidance in how to govern ourselves. This was such a profound impact that when this thing was ratified, at this point in time, there was no state that had not ratified it except for, and the only state that did not convene a convention was Rhode Island. Rhode Island was also the state that didn't want to have anything to do with playing with anybody. They didn't want any amendments. They were, and as a matter of fact, they had a term for Rhode Island back in those days. And if you're from Rhode Island, you won't like this, but they called them rogue, R-O-U-G-E, Rogue Island, because they were out on their own and they weren't working with anybody. And so there was this disdain that they had for the people from Rhode Island. You were going to say something.
Did they just want to be completely independent, independent from the British Crown and independent from everyone else gathering together for strength?
Yeah. So Rhode Island did, or you talk about the states and the colonies?
No. Why did Rhode Island want to stay out of it?
Well, so I think they marginalized what it took to obtain their independence. It took the Union to come together, because if you really look at each state on its own, Britain could have easily overpowered each of the states one at a time. And Rhode Island, being one of the smallest states and least significant as far as landmass and everything else, they could have easily taken over Rhode Island. Rhode Island received the benefit of being a part of the 13 colonies that stood up and actually successfully declared and obtained independence. So Rhode Island ended up, they actually had to deal with the reality in 1792 that at this point in time, they weren't a part of the Union. I believe it was 1792 when they finally ratified, that they realized that Britain was impressing and not honoring the treaty, and they still needed the Union. And they also realized that they were kind of between a rock and a hard place, because you now had 12 colonies that looked at them as, hey, either fish or cut bait, either you're going to be a part of this or we'll actually come over and conquer you and just take you. So Rhode Island was really facing a conundrum. They either had to come along or they had to go and quickly get Britain to come and save them, but they were too small. Even that wasn't a good strategic plan, because Britain would have said, no, we can't, we wouldn't even have a toehold. But they would have had a toehold in Rhode Island. It was that small of a state. So, So Rhode Island, I think they finally came to reality. They finally sensed reality. They had to join the Union. And when we look at the very first year under the Constitution without Rhode Island, and actually North Carolina didn't ratify it because they basically wanted to wait 1 year. In convention, they said, we want to wait 1 year. It's not going to kill us not to be a part of the Union. Let's just see what happens in this 1 year, because then we can decide whether, these fears that everybody has, because they weren't able to ratify with confidence. So they said, well, let's just wait. And so that's exactly what they did. They met in the summer as the federal government was finally acting for its first time. And at that point, they said, we want to join. So they became a part of the Union in the second year. So after they started meeting, the very first act of Congress was the act of administering the oath of office. But as they were moving forward, all of Congress, and when we say all of Congress, unanimous, all the representatives in the House of Representatives and all the senators all agreed that they needed to go to Washington to proclaim a day of thanks and a day of fast and a day of service for this Constitution. In other words, create a Thanksgiving. This is one of the very few times all of Congress unanimously chose to do something. And it was to actually, go ahead. You want to say something, so go ahead.
I do. I wanted to just bring up the fact that it's interesting that you have so many people that are just do not understand this and do not understand the lengths at which our founders went to make sure that God was recognized. They didn't do it so that because thinking, well, we're just going to be blessed. No, it was more like we recognize things, all good things come from God.
Right.
And we can't do this on our own power. So we need to appeal to heaven. Right?
Yes,
and
correct.
we need to ask God for help. And that's exactly the pattern that the Lord looks for. And we are the only country that's ever done that. Of course, he brought the nation of Israel up. He raised them up. And every time they got in trouble and they turned around and repented and sought his hand, he was there. But he knows our hearts. And so we can't just go looking for handouts all the time. We really have to, what you're painting a beautiful picture of these people just really wanted to have their autonomy from and be free from the British crown. And they knew the only way they could do it was to seek God's hand, but in earnest. You know, it's not like, oh, I promise I'll be a good person if you do this for me. They took this incredibly seriously.
So let me offer you this.
Telling us this. Yeah.
Okay, so let me offer you this, because there are there's two types of things that happened under our government. When we look at the spirit of unity, then I believe that you're witnessing the power of the spirit of our Creator, that the divine hand of providence had moved and unified them to create this Constitution. When you look at the spirit, when they did things in unity, they basically were coming together. There were certain things that they didn't, that were problematic, that weren't a spirit of unity. One of those spirits of unity that was an underlying contention under the Constitution was slavery. Slavery was an agenda that was a compromise. So when you hear compromise, that usually means contention. Now, who is the author or who is the spirit behind contention?
The enemy.
Right, Satan, the adversary. Right, absolutely. So when we look at, when we want to make an assessment, is this something that was, that God wanted? Or is this something that was a necessity of a compromise because the spirit of contention overruled them? They could not get beyond this one matter, like slavery, because these men were men. They had separate, paradigms. The Puritans looked down upon the religious worships of all the other people in the Union. And Massachusetts, really, they were at a position, they were probably the one state that wasn't going to join the Union. There was enough people that said, we can live without them. And the ironic part of this is that God had to move them first because he knew how stiff-headed and stiff-necked these men were up there. I should say the people in Massachusetts. They were so hard-headed that they created new states because people were teaching something that was an apostate doctrine, and that created the state of New Hampshire and the state of Connecticut, because those states were founded on a different religious doctrine. And so when we look at the pride or this paradigm that the people of Massachusetts had, it wasn't a coincidence that the war started there. God had to convince them that they needed the Union, because now they're being attacked and they realize that they can't fight off Britain without the other states. So they were driven by this. But how quickly we turn and forget the manifold and blessings that we've received from him. And so here we're talking in 1788, where they're looking at the Constitution, and the spirit of pride is already, we don't need the rest of the Union anymore. And so when we
Yeah.
start looking at those types of contentions, we see those things. You can literally see how Satan is constantly trying to divide and conquer us, even back
Always.
then.
Yeah.
But the real point is when we look at things that they came to the table and unified on, literally unified on very specific things, such as state sovereignty. They unified on that. They unified on, the freedoms, and there were men and people that were trying to drive agendas, and one of the agendas was to try to establish a theocracy. In other words, try to allow religious tests to exist under the federal government. By doing that, the federal government would then have to declare a religion, because you have to have a Bible to go by on what that religious test is. Which Bible are they going to use? And so every time the contention of these people who were trying to do these things, what was brought forth, everybody had to step back and examine the facts and go, we really don't want to go down that path.
They were escaping that.
But but let's get back to the Thanksgiving.
Okay.
This is the case where everybody agreed that the Constitution, because most of these men were involved in that convention or involved in the witnessing of it coming forth and going through the ratification, because when you read the ratification, some of the biggest advocates for the Constitution were the religious leaders. If you go through the Massachusetts, there were reverends that said, this is what we need to ratify this. I see nothing but his hand in this. And the same thing with Pennsylvania and so forth. So now they've kind of moving forward, and they realize that, hey, we need to take a moment now that we're getting ready to harvest our food and everything else, because it was towards the end of summer where they said, we need to ask the president to set aside a day of giving thanks. And so it wasn't just a day of giving thanks, though, because when you read this, because this is why I provided you the history of giving thanks, because it goes all the way. If you just to entertain me, if you click on the top header, which is the Puritan Thanksgiving. I'll just talk about this real quick in your viewing pane. The top, there you go. The Puritan Thanksgiving. So the Puritan Thanksgiving is what we celebrate today. And when you really think about it, where is it that we sanctify God in this Thanksgiving? Where is it that we really sanctify him and give him thanks? Because it's really today, the way we celebrate it, it's a holiday of gluttony, which is a sin.
Yeah.
It's a day of gluttony, entertainment, and sports. Where is Christ? And so this is a reason why they didn't go down this path of even using this type of Thanksgiving. If you click on the next one down, the first actual Thanksgiving in America, and as a matter of fact, almost all of these companies that were coming to America to basically declare a part of a colony, this area of land in this colony, what they did was they literally set it aside. It's, like you see it right here. We ordain that the day of this ship's arriving at the place assigned for our plantation in the land of Virginia shall be yearly and perpetually kept holy as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God. This is a year before the Puritan Thanksgiving. And when you start looking at this was a very common practice, because what these men did was they set aside this land for God and his king. They looked at the king as a divine king of Britain was his king for the earth. So when we really start looking at this thing of giving thanks, what they did was they actually set aside a day of actually giving thanks and service. They didn't have this big, huge feast. The reason the Puritans had a feast is because they failed for a couple of years trying to implement socialism, and they lost about half the colony.
Really?
Because people were dying because they were starving. If you don't understand the term tragedy of the commons, it comes from what happened in those first couple of years, because while they agreed that there would be communal land and everything done would be equally shared, The tragedy of the commons are that there were actors within and amongst them in the community that went out in the middle of the night and harvested for themselves because they didn't think that there was enough to share, that they thought that there's going to be people that are going to starve. So the tragedy of the commons was they guaranteed starvation and the death of people. So the people that abided by the law suffered by this law of socialism. So the tragedy of the commons actually destroyed this concept of socialism. And after doing that, I think it was Bradford was, I think, the governor. And he says, we're going to actually, everybody gets their own parcel of land. You grow and you feed yourself, and every person takes care of themselves instead of us being a big family. Because if you look at this, it's communism. What they were trying to do was invoking socialism, communism. And so they finally went to this free concept, and all of a sudden things started working. Wow. Interesting. So what they did, because they'd been starving so much, and now they had a year of plenty, now that the Lord finally blessed them for, taking care of themselves, then they actually had a big, huge feast. There was nowhere where they actually, and there was an association and relationship with we all know the history, but where was the centering and the service to God? There was no gluttony in these other Thanksgivings. This is why this was special, because when you really look at why they incorporated this into the American tradition, because every state and colony actually had their own Thanksgivings. Why this one? Because now they could actually shift it away from God and make it a holiday of gluttony.
Do you think that's why they did it?
Why do you think if you go through the pageants of what they teach, absolutely. If you go through the pageants of what they teach, there's far less of God in this than there is of all these other Thanksgivings that had nothing to do with eating at all. It was literally giving thanks, blessing the land, and setting it aside for Him. That's what those Thanksgivings were. But this Thanksgiving is even different. So let's go through the very first Thanksgiving under the United States, as these men were inspired to do by the divine hand of providence.
All right.
And so this is the Proclamation of Washington. So you will need to click on the third one. There you go. And so the Proclamation of National Thanksgiving, whereas it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor. I'm going to stop right here. As I continue reading this, I'm asking anybody and everybody, as you read or listen to what I'm saying, why is this not being taught in school? Why is this not the holiday that we're recognizing, or what we need to do as a nation? Because when you actually look, this takes us away from the carnal state of our Thanksgiving, and it actually forces us to focus one day in giving service of our own time and efforts on Him and helping Him in His work and His cause here in America. So let's go through this. Whereas both houses of Congress have, by their joint committee, requested me to recommend to the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, to be observed by acknowledging with great hearts the many and signal favors our Almighty God, especially by affording them an opportunity peaceably to establish a form of government for their safety and happiness.
Wow.
Now, therefore, I do recommend and assign Thursday, the 26th of November, because, again, that's pretty much after everybody has finished their harvesting. So now it's, the work and the toil of the year is done. You've cut all the wood to get through the winter to keep your house lit and warm. You've got the food stored, and so now you can, survive the winter. Now, what are we going to do with our toils? Well, let's end our day of, our time of harvest and all of our efforts for the year and give thanksgiving. But give thanksgiving to what we've been blessed with in our houses and our fields? No. Now, therefore, I do recommend and assign Thursday, this day devoted by the people of these states, I just skipped over a little bit, to the service of that great and glorious being who is the beneficent author of all good that was, that is, or that will be, that we may then all unite in rendering unto him our sincere and humble thanks for his kind and care protection of the people of this country previous to their becoming a nation, for the signal and manifold mercies and the favor able interpositions of his providence, and in the course and conclusion of the late war, for the degree of tranquility, union, and plenty which we have since enjoyed, for the peaceable and rational manner in which we have been established or enabled to establish constitutions of government for our safety and happiness, and particularly the national one now lately instituted, for the civil and religious liberty with which we are blessed, and the means we have of acquiring and diffusing useful knowledge, and in general for all great and various favors he has been pleased to confer upon us. Also that we may then unite in most humbly offering our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations, and beseech him to pardon our national and other transgressions, to enable us all, whether in public or private stations, to perform our several relative duties properly and punctually, to render our national government a blessing to all the people by constantly being a government of wise, just, and constitutional laws. Let me emphasize that constitutional laws, not laws of tyranny, made up laws, but the laws that are based on the Constitution, discreetly and faithfully executed and obeyed, to protect and guide all sovereigns and nations, especially such as have shown kindness to us, and to bless them with good government, peace, concord, and promote the knowledge and practice of true religion and virtue, and the increase of science among them and us, and generally to grant all mankind such a degree of temporal prosperity as he alone knows to be best. Before I give under his hand, let's go back up to what he's asking us to do. At the very beginning, when he says, now therefore I do recommend and assign Thursday, the day to be devoted by these people to the service. That's what he's asking us to do, to be in service of the great and glorious being. You see anywhere where we're going to have a big feast, all going to bring our, create a big, huge stew, and we're all going to, pitch in, our bounty, and we're just going to, get fat. No. He's calling upon the nation to serve God for giving us this Constitution. One day. Now, we all know that we have a commandment to keep the Sabbath day holy, but this is one day set aside to recognize and thank and serve him for granting us this nation. In other words, it's almost like a Sabbath day when you look at what they're asking.
We have really drifted.
Thank you.
Drifted.
And I've been asking pastors, I've been asking Christians to please, stop the gluttony. If you want to have a big family feast and be, have those good memories and so forth, don't do it on this sacred day. Do it Friday when everybody's still at home. Do it on Saturday, whatever. Because you may want to go shopping. Another carnal point of life that we have in this republic. Yeah. But my point is, you can still go get your turkey. You can still have your feast on. But if you're not recognizing his hand in this nation and giving thanks for this Constitution, then you want to know why we're not being blessed? Because we're not doing what we should be doing on this one day.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
It's very sobering. It's very sobering that we have drifted so far away from our founding, why we founded this country, how it was founded. Right. People hate the Christian faith, the true church. They are fine with the apostate churches where You have everything is vanilla. It's infant formula for preaching. They love that. They love a Jesus who accepts absolutely everything. Forget about the Bible. I have T-shirts that I sell to raise money for my ministry that say Jesus is Lord. And I intentionally wear them to work out. And I cannot tell you the looks I get from average people, just who I've been working out with for 20, 30 years. Well, 25 years. Their whole demeanor changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost as if they are confronting their own discomfort with Jesus.
Right.
It's like looking at themselves in the mirror,
right.
and they don't like it. They don't like it at all. And it's been an interesting, I guess I can call it an experiment.
Yeah.
But
well, so let me just say this, because there are many ways somebody can receive the message I'm making. I am not trying to make anybody feel bad that they have been educated and manipulated into feeling sanctimonious about this holiday of gluttony and carnal pleasures. Sitting down and watching your team play, all these types of things. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad or guilty. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to challenge. So 9 times out of 10, if you're an adult, you can be objective and you can look at what you're doing and then look objectively at some alternate opportunities that you could be using your time with and say, you know what? In using my Christian filter of how I am spending this day, I believe that I should change. I believe that I've unfortunately been not coerced, convinced by our education system and by our nation and by the corporation, the marketing and everything else that is, it's just like when we look at Christmas is a concocted commercial process. It's not really recognizing Christ's birth.
Right.
And so, because if it did, it would recognize it at a different time. I actually go through on my radio show the truth about Christmas. Christmas became a national interest because it caused people to stop going after the rich and affluent.
How did it do that?
So during the winter time, there was this thing. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Virginia resolutions, the state of Virginia in 1798, they were in session during those winter days of Christmas. And they signed the resolutions December 24th. It's not like they were going home. They didn't recognize Christmas. They didn't recognize the winter wilding that was actually the holiday, the pagan holiday of the time. If you understand the history of what ended up happening, so Cromwell was the guy. This goes back to the 1600s, where they actually tried to create a Puritan state of Britain. And they tried to basically make it illegal to celebrate the pagan holiday of the winter wilding. And that's what I call it, the winter wilding, because it is the celebration of the summer or the winter solstice.
Solstice.
Yeah. So the winter solstice is December 21st, just 4 days before what we celebrate as Christmas. And so they never included, but what they started doing was they started tying this. This is probably a whole nother show. This really is another show, because as I correlate how Britain went away from, actually, the Dutch got involved in Britain's affairs and actually assisted the revolution, for the Glorious Revolution, to get away from this, this puritanistic king and this hardcore monarchical theocracy of everybody will bow to him and our God and we'll all be good Christians based on our standards. If you really think about it, that's the paradigm of most Christians today. They would probably want and live in that type of country where they all had, the same belief of doctrine and all of those types of things. They don't want to have anything to do with, the Seventh-day Adventist or, whatever the religion that, you don't want to be having nothing to do with, because
Right.
we as a people constantly divide ourselves. That's the spirit of contention. Remember this. Yeah. And so in Britain, it wasn't about liberty as much as recognizing the pagan holidays, which is why the Dutch got involved, because they wanted to see Britain knock down a peg and being such, pretentious and self-righteous people. So that's how they came in and assisted the Glorious Revolution, where they actually created the Glorious Bill of Rights, 1688, something like that. And then from there on, they pretty much did focus on the Bible as the supreme law of the land, but they allowed the pagan celebrations and the recognizing paganism and those types of things to be a part of Britain. And so when the people came to America, most of that they didn't do. The pagan side actually started becoming more and more prevalent under the Constitution, just due to the fact that there was such a conflict between, or I should say a contrast between the poor and the rich. And in New York, where winters could be very harsh, when, December 21st is coming along and they're celebrating, what are they doing? They're getting drunk. And oh, by the way, guess what was a staple like milk back in those days? Distilled liquor. Distilled liquor, grain alcohol, because it wasn't distilled to the quantity or to the alcohol level they did then. It was basically like a grain wine, and that was liquid bread for them. So that's how they sustained themselves. It was a staple, just like milk, just like eggs. But back in those days, because they didn't have refrigeration and it wouldn't freeze because of the alcohol content, it was a good staple and it got them through the winters. And so anyway, so while they were getting drunk, they would start harassing and stealing and, doing things that they shouldn't be doing to the rich and affluent. And in New York, it got so bad that New York created their municipal police department in 1828 or 29, due to how bad the wilding was in New York the year before.
Wow.
In other words, they wanted to protect these people's property rights and so forth, because everybody felt, they weren't, there was no protection for them. So it was open season on the rich. Let's go steal from them. Let's go harass them. And because they would give up money, well, leave us alone. Here's all of our gold, okay, yay. They could go off and feed themselves.
So now you have somebody running for mayor who says everything's free. So right. Then we're going to get it all from the rich by taxing them, overtaxing them.
Yes.
So things haven't changed very much in 250 years.
That's the spirit of contention.
That is
the spirit of contention, because when we really think of what he wants us to do, he wants us all to be accountable for ourselves. And he wants us all to be able to hold each other accountable in a society to say, hey, why should I have to take care of you when you have the capability of taking care of yourself? No person, if they're capable of being able to do something to take care of themselves, should ever put their hand out and say, help me. I understand I understand the widow. I understand the infirm. And as a matter of fact, Christ even said, you'll always have those people. They'll always be with you. Mm-hmm. So we do have a responsibility to take care of them. But the people, and this is one of the reasons why the welfare system in America was so great, because it was ran by the churches. The pastor would go into your home and to see if you were worthy of a church assistance. Nowadays, you're entitled to church assistance because the church is the state. It's godless. It is the Antichrist church that we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't think people really realize that. That's what I used to teach in my apologetics course, is when you get rid of God as your focus on how to run your life, then what happens is there has to be some governing body. Because nature hates a void. Right. So what will come in are people, elected officials. Right. And they become God. And the way one of my daughters put it, She said, with all of this going on with the government shutdown and the SNAP problems that are arising,
right.
She said, well, if you allow the government to feed you, then you're going to have to allow them to starve you. Because if you're not providing for yourself or doing the very best you can,
Right.
and like you said, there are some people who just cannot. And
Right.
those are the people the church used to pick up and say, you know, you can come to the church, and a lot of churches do have food pantries. And I've been thinking about that. It's like, okay, is the church rising up to this challenge in this day and age, or have they gotten so complacent that the government has been picking up this slack here?
Well, so you're bringing up a great opportunity for me to do what did we learn before? Do you remember I provided you some insights regarding the 17th Amendment and state suffrage in the Senate? Remember that? It was probably a few meetings ago.
Yeah,
probably
it was.
back sometime in the middle of the summertime, where I basically helped everybody understand that the state legislature has the ability to control how their senators vote. And if their senators don't vote the way that state legislature tells them to vote, then they can remove them, because the Constitution demands that those senators provide suffrage for that state legislature. It's in Article 5. So this article that I kind of went through with you, the truth about the 17th Amendment, kind of laid this out. And I want to just give you, I told you so. This is I told you so. When we look at how the state, or I should say the government shutdown played out, it played out of the Senate, didn't it? And it went down party lines.
Yes.
It went down party lines. And I'm going to give you 4 senators that are Democrats that voted to shut down the government, that had these 4 senators followed their constitutional duty, if the state legislature told them to do this, we wouldn't be in this mess. If we were actually applying the constitutional principles that the states have their suffrage in that U.S. Senate, and the state legislatures were actually controlling those votes, we would not be subject to these bad treaties. We would not be subject to these insane things that are happening because the globalists control the Senate. And those 4 senators are 2 senators from the state of Georgia. Near as I can tell, Georgia is a completely Republican-controlled state. Do you think the state legislature in the state of Georgia, anybody that hears my voice, if you hear my voice and you understand that the people in Georgia actually are allowing their senators to shut us down and have this full control, and same thing with Arizona. If you know anybody in Arizona, say, why is it that you're allowing this to happen? Because the state legislatures are failing to do their job. If we hold everybody accountable to the U.S. Constitution, especially our state legislators, then we wouldn't be, the Senate would not be open for the globalists to do this crap to us. Forgive the French. So thank you so much for helping me focus on this, because this is a great opportunity to help everybody understand that the Constitution, if we follow it as it was given to us by the divine hand of providence, almost all of our problems would just go away. Maybe not the marital problems and your neighbor's fence and those types of things, but when it comes to government's problems within our daily lives, those are gone if we follow the Constitution. That's simple.
Right. And that is something that people just don't understand.
Right.
And this is why we're doing what we're doing. And I thank you so much for repeating this, because we have talked about this 3 times. You went over it fully back in the spring. We talked last time we met. We touched on this because it really upset me to know this. And there are like you said, thank you for that Georgia and Arizona, they could go back and yank those people out of there, but it's almost as if they don't understand.
It's not just them, though. It's not just them, because actually, if I break it down, if we actually had a full expose on the state legislatures, as you know, which are the state legislatures, because I have this in a spreadsheet, color coded, and we could go through all of the red states, and then you could see how many blue senators represent them. Again, Pennsylvania, Fetterman, that's a red state, and he's a Democrat. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of other red states that actually have Democratic or Democrat-aligned Republicans, rhinos. And those rhinos would not be able to go against the state. If the state said you vote this way and they don't, they're gone. In other words, we don't have to be subject to the whims and the desires of the globalists influencing these corruptible people.
Yeah. Well, what do we do, GR?
Well, it comes back down to, first we have to start thanking God for the Constitution. We have to treat the Constitution as his law for governing not our salvation, but governing ourselves as a nation. It is a very limited and defined. Our government could do these things, giving us the freedom to regulate ourselves at the state and giving ourselves the freedom from the state to regulate ourselves at the county level. We've allowed the smallest government, the government that has the least amount of authority over us, to actually rule us. As a matter of fact, I'm writing a new article regarding and exposing the Federalist Papers as the poisonous pill that has really helped destroy America. And so the point is that when we look at the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention, every state was so uniquely formed that they were all snowflakes. One state would have no executive, but they would have a legislative body that's similar to another state. But that other state would probably have an executive, but they didn't have judiciaries. So when you look at how the structure of how they were governing themselves, every state was so unique that they had to create a federal government, not to force the changes of the states, but to be able to inject itself into the state to help it. In other words, the federal government was not given these hard standards of common law and these functions of common law, because even every state, as they invoke common law, had their own different functions. In other words, they were so unique that the federal government needed to be flexible enough to adjust itself, not to come in and mandate and dictate to the state what it had to do. It was to provide justice for the state based on how they had their system. So when they started working between the two states, the job of the federal government was to be the peacekeeper and working with the differences between these states to make sure that nobody was being taken advantage of or being harmed by another state. They didn't have the control to actually come in and tell you how you were to govern yourself, how you have to set up, what is the standard of your Republican form of government. They had no control over any of that. And today they have all the control over all of that and everything more. And literally, if it's under the sun, the federal government has already placed a marker on it that they're going to regulate and control it. If it is visible to the human eye, they will regulate it just like they've regulated carbon dioxide.
Wow. That's so true. We have really, I keep saying it, we have really lost our way as far as there is this spirit. It is a spiritual battle.
Yes, it is.
To control people, because the enemy, Satan, wants people to be at wanting all the time and never to be independent.
Right.
And that it goes across the board. And our founders did everything they could to set us up for success for all eternity. But you just have these bad actors. And like you say, I would say most of the Congress and Senate, we call them Democrats and rhinos, are bought out by the globalists. And people do not understand that. And I'm so glad with President Trump's administration, his department, his cabinet, they understand. They bring up the globalists a lot, which that terminology just wasn't used before by people that could actually get the message across. It was used by us and people like us who are kind of aware of what's happening, but they're using that language now, which I'm thankful for.
Well, so there's a scripture that basically says, with your lips you do honor me,
Yeah,
but with your heart you
hearts are far
removed
from me.
yourself far from me. That's correct.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people that conservatives invoke this love for the Constitution, and yet they don't lift a finger to support it.
Right.
Yeah, you'll have a conservative. So let's look at it this way. Let's look at the Second Amendment conservatives. They'll lift their finger to save the Second Amendment, but they allow the shredding of the rest of the Constitution. So how are they constitutional? They're more antithetical to the Constitution than anything. So how is it that we can call them constitutional? They're myopic. They've cherry picked and said, this is the only thing we worry about saving. We don't care about what's happening to your kids. We don't care what's happening in the healthcare system. They're killing people. We don't care about them decimating our economy and all the unconstitutional things that this Leviathan is basically waging war against us. See my point?
Yes, and I think it is really important what you do in raising awareness, and I am so glad to be a part of it. And I think it's important for anyone listening to really know the Constitution and to understand. And I do want to do a show on the Christmas information, and also when you're ready to do Federalist Papers to understand what those are about. Not very many people have ever read them. I have, and get to know what the Constitution says, because it seems to be that's the big word these days, democracy, saving democracy. People do not understand. We are not a democracy.
That's right.
That turns into mob rule, because that's the majority rules.
Right.
What happens if the majority never lets any other voice in? And that's what we're seeing today, this battle. And so I know we've run out of time, but can you tell people where to find you and how to listen to your radio program, please?
Sure. As a matter of fact, do you do emails? Do you send out emails? Because there was an article written about me in influencing a county in the state of Washington, and the progressive reporter for the Spokesman Review wanted to, have me interviewed because they want to basically twist everything and so forth. So because I didn't give the journalist any information other than all the information I get put publicly out there for the county commissioners, so forth. So it was kind of favorable for me, but it was very anti-favorable for the constitutionalists and the commissioners, so forth. But the interesting thing is that people are starting to get it, that if we focus on full compliance to the Constitution, I think I already said it in this show, if we focus on full compliance to that U.S. Constitution, all of our problems from government go away. Your parental rights come back. Your right of conscientious objection comes back, not just in religious scopes, in anything and everything you want to conscientiously object. If you got a mathematic formula for objecting to something, then that should suffice as a conscientious objection. The framers didn't care because they couldn't inflict upon you. It was almost like Christianity. It is, in essence, the Constitution is so parallel to Christianity because it's about liberty. Can you drag a person into the water and save them?
No.
Okay. Can you drag a person into, forcing them to be a citizen of the United States? You don't have to be a citizen of the United States in America. You just can't vote. You don't have the protections under the Constitution. You don't have a right of due process. Even though the Supreme Court has said otherwise, the Supreme Court has violated the Constitution in saying otherwise. And this is where the Federalist Papers come in, because they use the Federalist Papers to basically assume all of these powers. And so, this whole article kind of shows how the court has gotten out of the bottle as the genie and has reached into the other bottles, bringing the executive and Congress with them. And they have been waging war against us and our liberties for a long time. A long time.
Will you be sending me that link?
I can. I send you the link to that article that they've exposed this. And I've had other people call, hey, what's going on out there? And I'm going, it's just a struggle. It's a part of the struggle. And that struggle may actually end up dying because there are players that are, they're not committed to the Constitution. And this is why we need to make sure that we support those people who signed the pledge that I have them sign. If I've got somebody, I got one person that signed the pledge for the 2026 election. If you're looking to support a constitutional candidate, that man is in Missouri, and he's running for state auditor. His name is Gerald Winstrand. And he is the man. He's the first one that I have, and we'll have other ones. And I'm asking everybody to please send some love to these people who are actually embracing full compliance with the Constitution, because that means they're not turning back. They're back on any part of it. We want full compliance. Okay. We need to go. I know.
Do another show and talk about solutions like what you're doing, so that my audience can see it. I really want people to go see what you're doing. So tell them your website and other social media and your show.
Okay. reclaimingtherepublic.org is my website and domain. My contact information is up on there. I am on Facebook, GR Mobley. You can just do a G period space, R period space Mobley. Or I think you can even do it without the space and it'll find me. But you'll recognize the GR Mobley because of that unique logo that I use, which is basically a Mobius strip. It looks like a reef of documents. It's a 5-sided Mobius strip. So when you look at it, it's like a 5-sided reef of different documents. They're founding documents. So anyway, yeah.
And your radio program?
Reclaiming the Republic on Red State Talk Radio, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern to 7.
Okay. Excellent.
And we're covering the Constitution. We actually started on the 17th of September, and we've been going every day covering the Constitution. So we're a month and a half into it, and we're up at the 14th Amendment now. So we go through every line and the nuts and bolts of what those lines mean.
Excellent. So, everybody, please go out there, educate yourself, and we're going to get to solutions. We really are. We just need to get active, right? Thank you, GR.
There's not enough time in my show to focus on him, but I'm focusing on what he's given us, because I think we've got plenty of shows that help people, find their salvation. I'm trying to save a nation. I'm trying to save his Constitution and the nation he gave us. And so the only way to do that is to focus on those documents to academically prove to everybody that this is the truth. This is his way of, he gave us a globalism solution of all mankind.
Yeah.
That's how wise, he did so many things that people just completely don't even understand to this day.
Yeah.
Right. And let me just say this. When we hear people say and quote John Adams, that John Adams said that this Constitution was made for a righteous nation, that only means that John Adams was short-sighted and did not see the depth of our Creator, because only our Creator knew that this nation would evolve into becoming less than a Christian nation. And today we're there. And the fact is, the only thing that can save us is that Constitution. So are you going to tell me that it's only for a Christian nation, or is it for any nation that loves liberty, that is willing to take a stand on the law itself? We can save ourselves without having to feel sanctimonious and pretentious that it's for us, Christian people. It's for all mankind. You don't necessarily have to be Christian, but the Constitution opens the door to allow all people to hear the truth. And when we hear all the truths about church and religion, Christianity dominates. So the only way that we can actually continue to preach Christianity through the world is by having constitutional principles and supporting that Constitution. They get rid of that, we're all done for.
Yeah, we are.
Right.
We'll be no different from anyone else. And some people recognize that, but we need to have more recognize
So
that.
it may make you feel better that John Adams said that the Constitution was given to a righteous nation. No. Our Creator knew where we would be in these days, and he gave us this Constitution to prove to the world that if you love liberty and the freedom of choice and the ability of self-accountability and holding your government accountable, then there you go. This is the document for you. And it gets government off of the throats of the Christians, and we can actually start having honest conversations about Christianity without them regulating us, because that's what they're doing. Anyway.
Yeah.
I digress.
That's okay. All right. I have to say goodbye, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll schedule another time. And I appreciate it so much that you're here.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate it.